Welcome back to another episode looking at the interior of the hobby barn. Today, we're going to pick up doing some of the electrical work, pulling wires and the conduits we placed in the last episode, and getting started on the panel. I've got the first spools of wire ready to roll, so let's get into it. First, let me put out the disclaimer that I'm not a professional electrician. But I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express one time, so that's more than nothing. But take that to mean that this is not an instructional video, and you choosing to do electrical work is at your own risk. Anyway, I'm choosing to start with the 110 volt circuits on the walls. Since I'm going to be using this space as a workshop, I want each of these circuits to be 20 amps. You may recall from the last episode that I'm running two discrete circuits to each of the longer walls, and I'm planning to make the left side of each box a circuit A, the right side a circuit B, and then a separate A and B on the next wall, and so on. This gives me 6 complete circuits in the main space of the shop. 20 amp circuits means I'm pulling 12 gauge wires. 4 through each section of conduit that'll be terminating in each of these outlet boxes. The east, south, and west walls we can see here all have 5 boxes spaced evenly, and these are all the ones that are on the lower side of that second girt. The upper boxes we'll see later on go for the 240 volt circuits. You'll see on each wall that I tried a slightly different method to pull the wires and something that resembled an efficient manner. And right about the time I figured out what felt good, I was done. I wonder if those lessons will stick with me. After the horizontal portion of the walls were done, it was time to run the lines back to the panel. Because of the length of these runs, I didn't want to fight with the wires being run individually, so I pulled out an approximate and generous length for one circuit, taped and labeled that, and then fed it back simultaneously with the second circuit. I started by feeding as much as I could, hoping to reach that first junction box before having to go and pull, and I was pretty successful with this method, which did 2 things for me. First, it meant I was able to limit my back and forth and climbing up into the ceiling, and second, it reduced the chances of the wires getting damaged as they were pulled into the metal box. Once that first run made it back, it was time to work my way around the barn doing the same for the rest of the circuits. Then, it was on to the 240 volt lines. For those, I'm pulling 3 conductors for each circuit. While some of my equipment, such as a welder, do not need the neutral, I figured it was better to have that wire in every run and not need it right now than it would be to pull a single conductor later on in an already populated conduit. It's just not as easy to pull that single conductor. Besides, I got plenty of wire and no other near-term work that it needs to be saved for. Once again, progressed wall by wall, and then I was able to move on to the fun part. The fun part, of course, is wiring the panel, and that's where we get to put all of these circuit breakers into this box. Then we'll bring each of the wires we pulled to their final resting places. We start by snapping the first breaker in with that oh so satisfying click. And then we'll do that another 15 times, at which point we'll start to unroll each circuit and get on to clipping, stripping, and seating the wires. Because of my somewhat pedantic nature, I print up a heat shrink label for each conductor to make sure that the panel lays out exactly how I want it to, and it's clearly marked. Many of us have seen some pretty ugly panels that look more like a rat's nest than a serviceable panel, and that's an outcome I want to avoid. So I somewhat methodically measure where I want the wire to go, clip it to an appropriate length, then strip and seat it in the breaker. Some people prefer to leave something of a service loop in case they have to move things around in the future, but my preference is to plan ahead, leave smaller loops in each of the junction boxes that I've used as pull points, and that means that I have another 6 to 10 inches of wire available in the future if needed, but I can maintain a clean and very serviceable panel. For me, this is really quite cathartic work, and after an hour or so of rejuvenating my brain, I'm left with something that I'm reasonably proud of as an amateur. More importantly, after running the outside ground wire and pulling in the last few circuits, I'll be ready for my first inspection, and I'll get to start on the installation. So even though this video is a little bit more abbreviated than usual, I don't expect as many people as normal to have made it this far into the subject of wiring. But if you happen to have made it here, consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. That'll help the reward center of my brain want to keep making more of these highlights of amateur handiwork. And your reward for sticking to the end is the almost finished panel.